If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. When the channel reaches 1,000 subscribers, I'll share a surprise story I've prepared especially for you. The morning starts cold and gray, with a low ceiling of clouds pressing down on the remote Allied airfield. Moisture clings to the metal skins of the P-51 Mustangs lined up outside the hangars. Engines rumble in the distance as returning escort flights prepare to land. The air smells of wet grass, exhaust, and burned oil. Evelyn Hart stands near the edge of the main hangar, notebook tucked tight under her arm, watching the runway with a quiet, focused stare. She is 22, small in frame, hair pinned back tightly because she knows no one here wants to see anything that looks unprofessional. She has been on this airfield for exactly 4 days. Everyone knows she came from a factory line, one of the huge assembly plants where aircraft frames move along steel tracks and engineers only see sections of planes, not combat machines returning from real missions. Her transfer file said she was sent here for field engineering experience. The officers around her treat it like she was sent here to stay out of the way. She feels their attitude every time she walks into a room. Why she is here? Her mission. Evelyn was assigned to investigate non-critical mechanical inconsistencies in returning Mustangs. The command phrased it in a way that sounded unimportant, but she read the reports before she left the factory. She knows the truth. Too many aircraft are crashing during high-speed dives after escort missions, and the explanations never make sense. Pilot fatigue, weather turbulence, unknown combat damage. All vague, all convenient. Even before arriving, she suspected something structural, something subtle, something that no one wants to admit. Captain Samuel Reeves. From across the airfield, Captain Samuel Reeves walks with a slow, controlled step toward the flight line, helmet under his arm. He's 30, a combat-tested ace with a thin scar above his right brow and the kind of steady expression men trust. He is not talkative. His background is known by almost everyone. 10 years of flying, first in training squadrons, then over Europe escorting bombers and surviving dogfights that killed pilots better than him. He lost 2 close friends in unexplained post-mission crashes. He keeps their letters folded in his flight jacket. He does not know Evelyn personally, only that a young technician has arrived to help with numbers. But he notices her watching every plane that lands. He can see she's not sightseeing. She's tracking every vibration, every strange angle of descent, every rough landing, storing it silently like someone with a purpose. The crash that breaks the routine. The approaching Mustang appears through the mist. Blue nose, code letters on the side, pilot flaps down early. Everything looks normal. Mechanics gather loosely near the service trucks, ready to refuel and inspect. Evelyn narrows her eyes. The aircraft descent angle looks steep. The Mustang dips lower, then its tail begins to shudder. Just a small tremor, but enough to make her step forward in instinct. No one else reacts. They've seen rough landings before. They assume the pilot is tired. Samuel notices it too. His jaw tightens as he watches. The tremor increases. The right wing dips. The aircraft tilts too sharply. The ground crew finally starts shouting commands. Evelyn's heartbeat jumps. She has seen this pattern in the reports, the sudden loss of stability right before touchdown. The Mustang rolls, nose first, and slams into the far boundary of the airfield. There is no explosion, just a violent collapse of metal that sends pieces scattering across the grass. The silence that follows lasts only a second before the shouts begin. Men run toward the crash. Samuel is already sprinting. Evelyn pushes forward, trying to keep up, shoes slipping on the wet ground. Her mind races through every diagram she ever studied of the aircraft: tail assembly, stabilizer brackets, control rods. She wonders if the same structural weakness she suspected has finally reached a breaking point. When she reaches the wreck, Samuel and 2 mechanics are pulling at twisted panels, but one look tells all of them the truth. The pilot, Lieutenant Morrison, a man with a quiet laugh and a fiancée waiting back in Kansas, never stood a chance. The ground crew steps back in frustration and grief. A mechanic curses the rain. Another mutters something about pushing too hard on descent. Evelyn doesn't speak. She kneels next to the broken tail section, hand steady despite the shaking in her stomach. Her reaction: fear, clarity, certainty. She knows she should feel shock or panic, but what rises instead is determination. If she stops now, more of them will die. She examines the stabilizer mount. The bolts show a subtle bend. The angle is wrong by only a fraction of a degree, but it is the same pattern she found in 2 earlier wreck reports. Her throat tightens. It isn't pilot error. It never was. Samuel approaches her quietly. His gloves are still muddy from trying to pull Morrison out. "You see something?" he asks, voice rough from the cold and the shock. She hesitates. She is the youngest engineer here. The officers barely acknowledge her. She fears saying the wrong thing and being dismissed again, but she fears another dead pilot more. "Yes," she says, steadying her voice. "The stabilizer angle is off. Not from the crash. Before it." Samuel doesn't answer immediately. He studies her expression, then the wreckage, then the damaged bolts. He doesn't laugh at her. He doesn't dismiss her. He just nods once. The end of the chapter. The others move away. Procedures must be followed. Reports will be written. Officers will again blame the pilot, the weather, or the strain of combat. But Evelyn stays beside the wreck, rain dripping from her hair, staring at the tail section as if it is the only thing that matters in the world. Because she already knows. This is not an accident. This is a flaw. And if she can prove it, she can stop it. Samuel watches her from a distance, quietly recognizing that she is not here to fill space or push paperwork. She is here for a reason. And she may be the only person on this airfield willing to dig into a truth no one else wants to face. Rain continued through the night, turning the far edge of the airfield into a stretch of mud that clung to boots and muted every footstep. Work crews had already cleared the wreckage and marked the impact site with lanterns, but the atmosphere across the base carried a heaviness that reached into every corner. Mechanics spoke quieter, pilots moved with less confidence, and even the officers who usually kept a strict, detached tone looked unsettled. The death of a pilot who had survived dozens of missions always created an unspoken tension. If a man that experience could lose control of a Mustang on landing, then anyone could. Evelyn reached the hangar early. She hadn't slept long, her mind running through the measurements she had taken and the angles she had memorized. She needed to confirm what she had seen. Something subtle but consistent, something that others missed because they walked into every investigation expecting the same familiar explanations. She wiped her hands on a cloth, set her tools in order, and waited for the crew chief to unlock the storage area where older wreck components were kept. Once inside, she searched for stabilizer parts saved from previous incidents. Some were bent beyond recognition, but others still had intact mounting points. She laid them in a row on the concrete floor and compared the bolt angles, one by one. The misalignment wasn't large enough for a standard inspection checklist to catch, but it repeated across several sections. The pattern was clear. She stood and checked the maintenance logs, wanting to know whether the same teams had worked on these aircraft or if the issue appeared across different crews. The records looked routine, with no signs of negligence or shortcuts. That meant the misalignment came from somewhere deeper, possibly from the original installation or from stress that worsened under certain flight conditions. She understood she would need to examine a functioning Mustang to understand the transition from normal to dangerous. The hangar doors opened and a gust of cold, damp air came in. Samuel entered quietly, flight jacket unzipped, hair still wet from the weather. He scanned the room until he found her crouched beside the stabilizer parts. He didn't interrupt. He watched her align a measuring stick along one of the mounting brackets and note the angle. "How many of them look like that?" he asked. "More than enough to prove something is wrong." Her voice was controlled, but her pulse jumped at the chance to finally say it to someone who might listen. He studied her layout on the floor, then the notebook beside her filled with numbers, sketches, and brief notes written in a tight, clear hand. He recognized the detail in the work. Many people took measurements on aircraft. Very few verified every number twice. "What do you need to figure out the rest?" he asked. "A clean aircraft," she replied. "One that hasn't been damaged or repaired recently." I need to see how the stabilizer sits under normal conditions. Then compare the geometry with what happens during a high-speed descent. He considered that. It wasn't a small request. Mechanics were protective of their planes, and officers didn't like anyone outside the chain of command touching critical components without approval. Still, he knew the situation wouldn't change if nothing new was attempted. "My Mustang is available," he said. "It's due for a systems check anyway." She felt a small surge of relief, but masked it behind a professional nod. "I'll need access to the tail assembly and the mounting brackets, and time to measure without interruptions." "You'll have it," he said. They walked together toward the aircraft. The thunder of engines outside echoed through the hangar as other pilots prepared for the day's missions. Samuel climbed onto the wing first, opening the panel near the rear fuselage. Evelyn followed with her measuring tools, lowering herself carefully to inspect the internal structure. Her focus sharpened as she examined each bolt, bracket, and hinge. The stabilizer on Samuel's aircraft looked properly aligned at first glance. The angles matched factory specifications, and there were no signs of stress fractures or uneven wear. But when she tightened the gauge against the mounting surface and measured the distance along the internal support beam, she noticed an inconsistency so small it was easy to overlook. Under static conditions, the stabilizer was within acceptable limits. But if flight stress pulled the mounts under load, even by a few millimeters, the stabilizer would begin to drift toward the same misalignment she had seen in the wrecks. She repeated the measurements to confirm. The numbers aligned perfectly with her calculations from the wreckage. The structure itself allowed a shift during high-speed dives. Samuel watched her closely, noting the way her expression tightened each time she rechecked a measurement. When she stepped back, he knew she had reached a conclusion. "It happens only in the dive?" he asked. "Yes," she answered. "The air pressure builds too fast. The stabilizer angle shifts before the pilot can feel the change. Once the vibration starts, there's almost no time to correct it." He exhaled slowly. "Then it isn't the pilots." "No," she said firmly. "It's the aircraft." She expected arguments, disbelief, or some hint that he thought she was exaggerating. Instead, he nodded again, the same steady gesture he gave before takeoff. He accepted facts when they were supported by evidence, something she respected more than she expected. She returned to her tools. "If I adjust the stabilizer by a small amount during assembly, I can counter the shift before it happens. But it will require altering the mounting angle." "Is it complicated?" he asked. "No. It could be done with something as simple as a small metal washer placed in the right position." He raised an eyebrow at the simplicity, then looked at her directly. "If you're right, this would stop the dives from breaking apart." "It would," she said, "but I need authorization before installing anything." "I'll bring it to command," he replied. Her stomach tightened. Officers didn't like unusual requests, especially coming from someone new, someone they didn't trust yet. But she knew there was no other way. She had to risk being rejected if she wanted to stop the crashes. Samuel left the hangar to speak with them. Evelyn stayed behind, checking the measuring tools again, then writing down the precise specifications of the correction. Her confidence was steady now, supported by evidence that matched across every measurement. Even if others doubted her, the facts were consistent. She didn't notice the passing hour until she heard footsteps returning. Samuel approached, expression restrained. He held a clipboard with authorization for a technical assessment. Limited access, temporary approval only, and permission to present findings at a meeting the next morning. It was less than she wanted, but more than she expected. "You'll be heard," he said. She took the clipboard. "Then I'll make sure what they hear is clear." For the first time since her arrival, she felt the weight of resistance start to shift. Not by much, but enough to matter. Samuel walked beside her as she prepared her notes, and there was no tension in his presence, only quiet support. The rain eased outside, and the engines of returning aircraft echoed faintly across the airfield. Evelyn looked at the half-open hangar door and felt a calm resolve settle inside her. The problem was real. The pattern was undeniable, and now she had the chance to prove it. The next morning arrived colder than expected, with a sharp wind sweeping across the airfield and carrying the smell of fuel from the night shift. The meeting with command was scheduled early, before the first wave of sorties. Mechanics moved between hangars preparing aircraft, while several pilots gathered near the briefing room, already slipping into the focused mindset required for combat missions. Evelyn kept her notebook held firmly against her chest as she walked toward the operations building, Samuel matching her pace without speaking. Inside, the meeting room felt cramped. A long table stood at the center, scattered with maintenance reports, clipboards, and half-finished cups of black coffee. Several officers sat in stiff-backed chairs, brows set in stern lines. Two senior mechanics were present as well, arms crossed, faces guarded. Their expressions reflected more than skepticism. They reflected pride, habit, and the belief that their years of experience outweighed new calculations from someone barely older than their apprentices. Evelyn took her place at the end of the table. The commanding officer signaled her to begin. She unfolded her diagrams with steady hands, laying them flat so every angle and measurement could be seen. She explained the stabilizer shift under high-pressure load, the mechanical tolerance in the mounting brackets, and the precise way the metal flexed during high-speed dives. Her voice remained calm, her focus unbroken, even as several officers exchanged doubtful looks. One mechanic leaned forward. "You're telling us the frame itself allows for that kind of shift?" "We check those mounts every inspection." "It doesn't shift on the ground," Evelyn answered. "It shifts under speed. The structure bends under sustained pressure. The design tolerances are too tight, and the slightest distortion triggers an oscillation the pilot cannot correct." "And your fix is a washer?" an officer asked, his tone sharper than necessary. "A washer placed at a specific point," she clarified. "It changes the stabilizer's effective angle just enough to counter the drift at high speed." Silence settled over the room for a moment. Some of the men looked down at her diagrams again, as if hoping the numbers would contradict her. But the math held firm. She had checked each figure repeatedly. Samuel stepped forward. "I felt that tremor in my own aircraft last month. I didn't know what caused it, but it was there. Her numbers fit what I experienced in the dive." His words shifted the atmosphere slightly. Pilots held authority in unspoken ways. Experience in combat carried weight no rank could override. The officers listened more closely now, even if reluctance still lingered. The commanding officer adjusted his glasses. "If this modification fails, we lose a pilot and a Mustang. We're already short on both." "It won't fail," Evelyn said, not out of arrogance, but out of certainty built on hours of precise work. The officer studied her for a long moment, gauging her resolve. Then he glanced at Samuel, whose expression carried no hesitation. The airfield had lost too many men in unexplained crashes. The possibility, however small, that this could stop the pattern was difficult to ignore. At last, the officer signed a temporary authorization. "One aircraft, one test flight. If it performs exactly as you claim, we'll consider a wider implementation." Samuel took the document and nodded once. Evelyn inhaled slowly, steadying the rush of tension that ran through her. This was the chance she needed, but it came with the weight of expectation from entire squadron. Outside, the day had brightened slightly. Mechanics hurried to ready the test Mustang, tugging equipment carts and loosening access panels. Samuel walked toward the aircraft first, handing the signed authorization to the crew chief, who read it with a frown. "We're really doing this?" the chief asked. "We are," Samuel said. Evelyn approached with her tools. She didn't rush. She moved with methodical precision, checking each bolt, measuring each surface, confirming the angle of the stabilizer bracket before making the adjustment. The washer itself was a small piece of metal, ordinary in every way, yet capable of changing the behavior of an aircraft at hundreds of miles per hour. Its significance wasn't in what it looked like, but in what it prevented. Some mechanics watched with crossed arms, others with cautious curiosity. They did not interfere, but their scrutiny was constant. Evelyn tuned them out, focusing only on the alignment. Samuel observed everything quietly. He saw how she double-checked every measurement, how she tightened each bolt to the exact torque specification, and how her expression shifted slightly, becoming heavier, as she reached the moment of final adjustment. She wasn't afraid of being wrong. She was afraid of someone else dying because she didn't push far enough. When a modification was complete, she stepped back and exhaled. Her hands were slightly tense, but her voice remained steady when she spoke. "It's ready." Samuel inspected the tail section himself, more out of habit than distrust. Then he moved toward the cockpit. Evelyn followed, handing him the checklist she had written specifically for the test. He scanned it briefly, then folded it and tucked it inside the cockpit frame. "I'll fly it exactly as you need," he said. His tone carried calm confidence, but Evelyn could see the weight he carried too. A test flight wasn't routine, not with an improving modification. But he trusted her numbers. He trusted her judgment. And he trusted the way she approached every detail as if someone's life depended on it, because it did. As ground crew prepared to roll the aircraft out, an officer approached with a final reminder. The tower would monitor the entire flight, and any sign of instability would require immediate return. Samuel nodded. Evelyn stood beside the aircraft, her mind racing through calculations, force loads, and dive profiles. She forced herself to breathe steadily. The Mustang's engine ignited with a deep growl, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Samuel closed the canopy, signaled the crew chief, and the aircraft began to taxi toward the runway. Evelyn stepped back, hands clasped in front of her, eyes locked on the moving plane. Her heartbeat lifted with each rotation of the wheels. She knew the aircraft inside and out. She knew the numbers were right. But seeing it roll away under the weight of her modification filled her with a tension she could not hide. Samuel reached the runway threshold. The propeller spun into a blur. The engine roared. Then the Mustang surged forward, lifting off the ground and climbing into the gray sky. Evelyn watched it rise until it disappeared into the clouds, her breath held without realizing it, aware that everything she had worked for was now in the hands of one pilot testing one small piece of metal that could change the fate of many. The Mustang climbed through the clouds and leveled at testing altitude, its engine humming with a steady rhythm that echoed faintly across the airfield. Everyone on the ground moved differently now, slower, quieter, as if noise alone might affect the outcome of the flight. Mechanics lingered near tool carts, pilots paused before their briefings, and officers stood outside the control tower, staring upward despite knowing they couldn't see anything past the gray layer of cloud cover. Evelyn remained near the edge of the runway, arms folded tightly, not for warmth, but to keep her hands from trembling. The air felt colder each minute the aircraft remained out of sight. She watched the control tower windows, trying to read the reactions of the operators inside, but their expressions were hidden behind glass and distance. Inside the cockpit, Samuel adjusted the throttle and felt the aircraft respond cleanly. No resistance, no unusual stiffness in the controls. He tested basic maneuvers first, shallow turns, slight changes in pitch, short bursts of acceleration. Everything felt stable. He scanned his gauges and took in the familiar hum of the air passing over the fuselage. Nothing signaled danger, but he knew the real test was still ahead. He pushed the throttle forward and began gaining speed. The Mustang shuddered lightly as it met a patch of turbulence, but the stabilizer held firm, responding predictably. He continued to accelerate, angling the aircraft into a controlled shallow dive. At this stage in previous flights, he had felt the first sign of tail vibration, the uneasy hum that spread through the control stick and warned him something was building beneath the surface. This time, the feedback remained normal. He leveled out again, banking to the left before setting up for the true test, a high-speed dive at a descent rate known for amplifying structural weaknesses. His pulse picked up slightly, not out of fear, but out of the determined focus he'd learned after years of flying in hostile skies. He trusted the aircraft. He trusted the numbers. And he trusted the person who had studied the structure more carefully than anyone else on the airfield. On the ground, Evelyn leaned forward, unconsciously holding her breath as she listened to the faint shifts in engine sound. She tried to identify each change, climb, turn, acceleration, but she had to rely on instinct and engineering logic rather than visibility. She replayed the measurements in her mind, running through the calculations as if reviewing them could influence the aircraft already miles above. Samuel initiated the dive. The Mustang pointed downward, engine roaring as speed increased rapidly. Air pressure built across the frame. The stabilizer absorbed the load. The controls transmitted the strain straight through the stick and into Samuel's hands. But the tremor never came. No tail flutter. No sudden drift. No vibration creeping along the fuselage. The aircraft held steady. The modified stabilizer maintained its angle, countering the force that had caused so many Mustangs to lose control. Samuel continued the dive longer than necessary, pushing the aircraft harder than he would in combat, determined to test the limits. When he finally pulled out of the descent, the Mustang responded with smooth, predictable force. He allowed himself a single exhale. On the ground, the shift was visible even before the call reached the tower. The distant engine tone leveled out, followed by a stable, even approach pattern. Officers straightened. Pilots stopped talking. Mechanics looked toward the runway, as if bracing for confirmation. Evelyn stood perfectly still, eyes locked on the sky. The control tower doors opened. A communications officer stepped outside, looking directly at the small gathering of personnel. "He's coming in clean." Relief spread through the crew, but Evelyn didn't move. She kept watching, not trusting anything until the aircraft was safely down. Moments later, the Mustang broke through the clouds and lined up at the runway, its descent steady and controlled. No sudden drop, no roll, no instability. The wheels touched down lightly, bounced once, then settled into a smooth landing run. The engine eased back as the aircraft slowed, turning toward the hangar. Evelyn felt her shoulders loosen, the tension finally breaking. She didn't smile, but something inside her steadied, something that had been coiled tightly since the moment she saw the first wreck. Samuel opened the canopy as the aircraft rolled to a stop. Ground crew members rushed in, gathering around, asking questions all at once. He ignored most of them, climbing down and walking directly toward Evelyn. He didn't offer a speech. He didn't dramatize the moment. "It worked," he said simply. Those two words were enough for everyone to hear. A wave of quiet acknowledgement moved through the group. Mechanics who had doubted her, officers who had hesitated, and pilots who had lost friends in similar crashes. The shift in their expressions was subtle but unmistakable. They understood what this meant. The commanding officer approached next, slower than the others. He asked for a full report, but his tone carried none of the earlier dismissal. Instead, he listened as Samuel described the behavior of the aircraft in the dive, each detail confirming Evelyn's calculations. The approval came minutes later. "Begin applying the modification to the rest of the squadron." Crew chiefs snapped into motion immediately, issuing orders and gathering tools. Several mechanics approached Evelyn for instructions, their earlier reluctance replaced with genuine respect. As she walked them through the installation process, she spoke clearly, focusing on precision and safety. She answered their questions without hesitation, aware that each corrected aircraft meant another pilot would survive a dangerous maneuver. When the work began on the next Mustang, Samuel paused beside her. His expression was calm, but carried the depth of someone who had just felt the difference between life and death measured in the thickness of a washer. "You changed the aircraft," he said, "and you saved lives today." Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly, grounding herself. She didn't want praise. She wanted consistency, verification, certainty. But hearing it from him mattered more than she expected. The sound of tools tightening bolts filled the hangar. More pilots gathered near the runway, watching the modifications with renewed attention. The atmosphere of the airfield had shifted, not from celebration, but from a collective understanding that something dangerous had finally been identified and stopped. Evelyn looked toward the next Mustang being prepared and tightened her grip on the clipboard. There was still work to do, but the hardest part, the part no one believed, had been proven. And now, the changes would spread farther than she could yet imagine. The following weeks transformed the airfield. Not suddenly, not with loud declarations, but with steady, disciplined changes that spread through every hangar and maintenance bay. Mechanics applied the stabilizer correction one aircraft at a time, working from early morning until long after sunset. Toolbox lids snapped open, torque wrenches clicked into place, and the smell of metal filings and machine oil filled the air. Every Mustang that rolled out of a hangar carried the small adjustment Evelyn had designed, though no one passing by would have noticed anything different at first glance. The effect, however, was impossible to ignore. Pilots who took modified aircraft into escort missions returned with clear reports. No unexplained vibration in dives. No sudden tail instability. No dangerous oscillation building at high speed. Their notes became shorter, cleaner, more confident. Crew chiefs, once skeptical, now logged fewer structural complaints and found fewer irregularities during post-mission inspections. Evelyn worked through all of it, methodical, calm, rarely stopping to rest. She double-checked every installation and inspected each aircraft before it left the hangar. Her hands were often streaked with oil by midday, her sleeves marked by dust from the concrete floor, her hair flattened under a work cap she never remembered adjusting. She didn't seek attention and avoided any praise directed too loudly her way. The only recognition she accepted was the steady improvement in the airfield's safety logs. Her quiet presence grew into a fixture the base relied on. Mechanics asked her for clarification without hesitation. Pilots brought her their questions about flight behavior. Even officers stopped treating her recommendations as suggestions and began treating them as necessary parts of the maintenance routine. The base wasn't just safer, its morale lifted in a way rarely seen during wartime. The absence of unexplained crashes meant fewer empty bunks, fewer letters written to grieving families, fewer silent moments at the mess hall where everyone avoided eye contact. Men who once feared the instability of their own aircraft now trusted the descent patterns that had previously unsettled them. One afternoon, Samuel returned from a difficult mission over France. His aircraft touched down smoothly, rolling to a stop with dust and engine heat rising off the fuselage. When he climbed out of the cockpit, his expression revealed the exhaustion of hours spent above enemy territory. But beneath that fatigue was the unmistakable calm of someone who knew his aircraft had not betrayed him. Evelyn approached with her usual clipboard, ready to perform her inspection. Samuel handed over the flight notes, leaning against the wing for a moment before speaking. There was heavy fire, he said. Too many bombers drifting out of formation. But the dive felt solid. Every time, she nodded, scanning his notes. The stabilizer held within range. It did. Exactly how you predicted. She didn't look up right away. She wanted to confirm the numbers first, but the relief was already tightening her chest. He watched her reactions with the same steady attention he had shown from the first moment. He realized she saw something others overlooked. Before he walked away to file his formal report, he placed a fresh cup of coffee on the wing beside her tools. It had become a gesture he repeated each morning and often after missions. It wasn't meant to be noticed by others, and it wasn't symbolic. It was practical, quiet, and sincere, offered out of respect for the hours she gave to those who depended on her work. Days turned into weeks. The airfield continued its operations without the pattern of crashes returning. More test data arrived, confirming the stability of the modification. Eventually, Command sent formal documentation acknowledging the successful correction and recommending its adoption in other nearby units. The report listed improved safety metrics, reduced non-combat losses, and a specific mechanical adjustment responsible for the change. They credited the engineering team collectively. They referenced calculations and field assessments. They used formal language. But the people on the airfield knew whose hands had done the real work. Evelyn kept the document folded inside her desk drawer. She preferred checking stabilizer bolts over reading commendations. The sound of aircraft landing safely mattered more than any signature. As spring approached, the airfield quieted slightly. Missions remained active, but the squadron no longer carried the additional fear of malfunction. Pilots trained new recruits with greater confidence. Mechanics spent more time inspecting weapons systems instead of structural damage. The entire unit ran more smoothly because one part of the aircraft, one small, overlooked weakness, had finally been corrected. On a clear afternoon, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in days. A group of Mustangs approached the airfield in formation, their engines rumbling in a controlled, familiar rhythm. Evelyn stood outside the hangar, watching them descend. The landing pattern was clean and steady, each aircraft touching down without a hint of instability. Samuel's Mustang was the last to land. He braked gently, taxied toward the hangar, and powered down the engine. When he stepped onto the ground, he met Evelyn's eyes from across the tarmac. There was no dramatic moment, no speech, no visible celebration, just a quiet understanding shared between two people who had carried the responsibility of keeping others alive. He walked toward her, leaving a trail of dust behind his boots. "Every aircraft is back," he said. Evelyn nodded. "That's all that matters." The base around them moved with the usual rhythm of war. Mechanics shouting instructions, pilots removing flight gear, officers carrying reports. But something settled between them that felt certain and steady. A war was still going on, and the world beyond the airfield remained unstable. Yet here, in this small corner of it, hundreds of airmen returned safely because a flaw had been found, understood, and corrected by someone almost everyone had dismissed on her first day. Evelyn turned toward the next aircraft being rolled into the hangar, lifting her tools with calm determination. Samuel watched for a moment longer before heading toward the mess hall, planning to leave another cup of coffee on her bench when she returned. Nothing more needed to be said. Everything was complete.